What's up, everyone? It's Captain Kyle Smith, and this week I sat down for a morning meeting with estate planning attorney Rod Hatley. He outlines all the ways to protect your estate so you have something to pass down to your heirs after you pass away. If you're a first responder listening to this, you must put a plan in place. Hope you guys enjoy it. All right, hey Rod, welcome to Bullhead. Thanks for meeting me.
Thanks for having me, Kyle. Pleasure to be with you today.
Well, it's a pleasure to meet you. We share a mutual friend, Jeff Whittington. He put me in touch with you. I was asking him about somebody that was an expert in the field of estate planning. We're going to get into that more in your first alarm, but right away he mentioned I needed to reach out to you because you're an expert in the field. But before we get into your first alarm and discuss more about that, how's the pandemic affected things in your line of work?
It's an interesting question. I mean, obviously people have become sick, had to be hospitalized, and tragically, they didn't have the necessary documents. For example, they didn't have a healthcare directive, HIPAA authorization, and these are very important documents that people should have anyway. But certainly the pandemic has really brought it to the fore that without these documents, you leave it to your family to have to make those gut-wrenching decisions. For example, I'll pick on myself. So that you know, I've done my own estate planning, and I do have a healthcare directive and a HIPAA authorization. But if I didn't, and I had to go to the hospital, then I'd have to, rely on some third person who's put me into the hospital to make those important decisions for me, and then wonder, make those gut-wrenching decisions. Is Rod going to be kept alive, or should I just go ahead and let him go? So I don't want to be kept alive artificially, but I would hate for somebody to have to make that very difficult choice, when the chips are down. So that's the reason why these documents are so important anyway. But certainly the pandemic has brought it to the fore.
Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense. And I think too, part of it is, life has sort of slowed down a little bit. And so some of the things that we knew was a priority, maybe it kind of slid down the priority list a little bit. Now with the pandemic and people being, a lot of folks working from home, they've kind of taken the time to think, you know what, this is a deadly virus. Let's take care of some of the things that we really need to do.
Sure.
And so I think that all kind of plays into it. But I'm anxious to hear more about that when we get into your first alarm. So you ready to get going?
That's good.
Okay. So a first alarm assignment, Rod, on the San Diego Fire Department consists of 4 engines and a truck. But here at the Firehouse, I'll ask you 4 questions. You give us 1 piece of advice. You ready?
Good. Excellent.
Cool. So when you're first in on a first alarm, you have to give a size up. And a size up is who you are, where you work, and how long you've been doing it.
Yeah, I'm Rod Hatley. I'm a tax, estate planning, and asset protection attorney. I advise successful individuals and families on estate planning strategies that eliminate taxes and protect assets so they can leave legacies. I practice law in Carmel Valley here in San Diego, and I've been in practice. I've been licensed for 34 years, but I've spent the past 25 years focused on estate planning. And really the reason for that was my father passed away while I was on active duty in the U.S. Navy JAG Corps. So I used to represent the accused at courts martial, etc. And what happened was Dad had a simple will, and wills go through probate, and Dad had leukemia. So at that point in his life, Dad was making emotional decisions, as you would understand anybody would. The reality was, because Dad could not bring himself to do more and better planning that I had really encouraged him to do, he died with a simple will. And it took my sister and me 7 years to get through probate back in my hometown of Memphis, Tennessee. So that was a very unhappy experience. And I decided, well, you can either be upset about this or you can do something positive with it. So when I came off of active duty, I moved to San Diego and then went and got an additional law degree. And then I transitioned into private practice. And that's what I've been doing since 1996, is doing estate planning and helping people avoid conservatorship and probate. And I think that's a big win for me. Because when I was a criminal defense attorney in the Navy, I was always in a reactive mode. But now that I do estate planning law, I guess I get to be proactive, and I like that a lot better.
That is going to ring really true for a lot of our folks, being proactive. I love the way you put that, because we call ourselves sort of professional problem solvers, where we're constantly what ifing everything. What if this happens? What if that happens? So we have all these contingencies in place, and estate planning is going to dovetail into that perfectly with people that are trying to put together, protect their assets. This is a what if scenario, and you have to have these documents in place, or you're going to be stuck. But before we get any further, I just want to say thank you for your service in the Navy. And kind of along those same lines, people that put themselves at risk in their
Sure.
in their work. For
Yeah.
first responders, why is it particularly important to have some sort of estate plan in place?
Oh, well, I mean, you can just imagine, if you're a first responder, you show up. If you're a police officer, you show up to an active shooter situation, or, just think 2 weeks ago. I know we're recording this on January 20th, but 2 weeks ago, we had that tragic situation at the nation's capital, where I know at least one DC police officer was killed. And I think another one later died as a result of a suicide. So these are important, documents to have in place. Or if you're a fireman, you are responding to a scene. You don't know. I mean, you hope, and certainly you train and prepare to come out of it, but sometimes people don't make it home. So it's a reality, especially given the first responders. They really ought to give thought to having something in place in the event that they don't make it home.
Yeah, no, that's well said. And something we're really familiar with in our line of work is something like an advanced directive. Somebody that's
Sure.
in hospice care or something like that has a do not resuscitate orders.
Bingo. Yeah.
And so those are really familiar to us, but unfortunately, a lot of our people haven't made the connection that these are documents that we need to have. And
Yes.
and if something happened to us where we were to lose our lives and we didn't have any we had no planning in place, you mentioned something called probate. Can you just expand a little bit on that, Rob?
Yeah, what probate is, see, the reality is, I mean, you really have an estate plan whether you realize it or not. It's called probate. So the state of California wrote a plan for you. So if you die without a will, then the state of California has a prescribed procedure. So somebody will have to be appointed the administrator. We call that personal representative. A personal representative to make sure that all your creditors are paid off and whatever's left over is distributed to your next of kin. And if you haven't set that up ahead of time, then we have to trace that in your family tree using the California probate code, and then we'll find who your heirs are going to be. But, so basically California has already written a plan for you, but it may not be the plan that you really want to see, especially if you've got youngsters at home. Because I always like to ask the question, how many financially responsible 18-year-olds do you know? So, I mean, and at 18, they're an adult. Technically, they're an adult, although probably not realistically they're an adult. And, if they get a large sum of money, money doesn't come with instructions. And so they might, and so it's not unusual. Somebody who's received a windfall like that, they blow through it rather quickly. And then they realize only after they wake up, oh my goodness, what happened? So there's a great way that we can get out ahead of that and protect youngsters from their own immaturity and inexperience.
Yeah, no, that sounds like something everybody can use. Now, is there sort of a most common plan, or is there a trend when you work?
Yeah, I mean, the most common plan is what I would call a personal protection plan. So if somebody is a single person, or they could be a married couple, if they don't own real property, I think a will, a power of attorney, a healthcare directive, and a HIPAA authorization would be perfectly fine for them, especially if they don't have children. If they have kids, we can provide for guardians. So let's take a situation where maybe it's a single parent, or maybe it's a young couple. They don't own their home. Maybe they rent an apartment or a condo, but they've got little ones. And so they can say, in the event something happens to one or both of us, then, well, more typically, if it's husband and wife, if they perish in a common disaster, like a car wreck, plane crash, what have you, then they can nominate guardians who would take care of their kids, raise them according to their values, love them, etc. And I think that's a great answer. But so that's what I call a personal protection plan. It's a will-based plan, but it's still going to go through probate when somebody passes on. But at least you've nominated guardians for your children. Now, as an individual or a married couple may acquire a home at some point where they're paying the mortgage, etc., then it's a really good idea to have a living trust, because then they can put the home into the trust, because probate is figured on the fair market value. For example, here in California, let's say that it's not unusual that a home might have a $1 million fair market value. And so statutory probate attorney's fees on a $1 million piece of property are $23,000. And the personal representative gets a like amount of money. So it's $46,000 on a $1 million piece of property. So call it 5%. And that's for nothing more than just, filing the paperwork with the probate court downtown and shepherding it through the probate process. Okay. And so the idea is if we can avoid the probate, we think that's a much better answer. And so by having a living trust, I always tell people, think of a living trust as kind of like an open top box. You put assets into the box. Assets in the box don't go through probate. They don't go through a conservatorship. You're probably wondering, well, what's a conservatorship? That's a guardianship for a grown person. So I'll pick on myself. Again, I've got my own plan in place, but if I didn't, let's say that tonight when I'm driving home from the office, I get into a bad car wreck. Now I'm mentally incapacitated as a result of that injury. At some point, someone's going to need my signature. The way they're going to get it is some third person puts me in front of the probate court judge downtown and says, Your Honor, this is Rod. He's incompetent now to manage his affairs. Please appoint me, some third party, to be Rod's conservator. And so now the conservator has to report to the court every 2 years. How am I doing? How are they spending my money? And interestingly, I'm in probate court. It's a conservatorship proceeding. And I'm alive, though I'm not well, and I'm subject to the probate court jurisdiction, at least until I either get better or die. And if I die, then we go to a death probate, where, again, we have to inventory and appraise all the assets, pay off the creditors, and then distribute whatever is left over to my heirs, whoever they might be. And if there are any 18-year-olds or youngsters, it'll be held in trust until they do turn 18, and then they get the money. Again, how many financially responsible 18-year-olds do you know?
Right.
Yeah.
Gosh, boy, that sounds horrible. Not only the cost related to going through probate, but also the time. And it sounds on me that would be a nightmare to put your.
Well, especially in light of the pandemic, because, I used to tell people it might take 12 to 18 months. And in light of the pandemic with the court shutdowns and just the delays, I'd say figure 2 years possibly or longer. And in my own family's case, it took us 7 years back in Memphis, but there were other issues that Dad had that we had to clean up, with the IRS. So anyway, that's just an example of what can happen. And certainly if we have, if the client has a home, I'd recommend a living trust. Put the asset into the trust and then have your other assets like your bank accounts and brokerage accounts, have that owned by the trust too. And then if you have life insurance, have the life insurance policy payable to the trust. And then maybe also if they have retirement plan monies, have those payable to the trust too. It just depends on the circumstances. Then a lot of the probate is basically avoided. And so again, picking on myself, I've done my own plan. If I'm incapacitated mentally, no conservatorship, and someday when I pass on, no probate. And the people that I care about that I'm going to leave assets to would receive those assets in a way that I think is going to be magnificent for them. So they're protected from later creditors or predators. That is to say, they get sued or have a divorcing spouse. I like that. I like that a lot better.
Yeah, sure. Now, you mentioned putting retirement accounts into the trust as well as living trust.
Let me clarify. Don't put them into the trust, but make them payable to the trust.
I see.
Because if you put them into the trust, you can make them immediately taxable. We don't want to do that. But based on the client, it may make sense to have the retirement plan proceeds payable to the trust, especially if they have youngsters at home. There's a new change in the law, which we don't need to get into. But the bottom line is, when the kids turn 18, they've got about 10 years within which to take all that money out of the IRA. Okay. And you can either take a tenth a year for 10 years, or you can take it all a lump sum in the 10th year, et cetera. But as long as the kids are under the age of 18, it makes sense to have it go into the trust to keep that money invested in compounding, et cetera. And then when they turn 18, then they need to talk to the financial advisor, mom and dad's financial advisor. Maybe it makes sense to start doing yearly distributions, or just wait till the 10th year and take a lump sum distribution then.
Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense. I've had several financial advisors here on the morning meeting that I'll link up above. And this stuff does get complicated, guys that are listening to this.
Yeah.
Don't attempt to do this stuff on your own. You need to consult the experts, because it's not going to be good enough to just scratch something out on the back of an envelope and hope that's right. Yeah. We have to go find the experts that can help us wade through this stuff. We would never We would never call you to help us come put out this burning building over here. It's the same thing for our folks. Please just.
And I appreciate that, and I think that's important. I know that we are a devout nation of do-it-yourselfers. We love to do it ourselves. The one thing I would caution folks is, don't buy the internet kit, the will kit or the trust kit. The challenge is you don't know what you don't know about the law, okay? I mean, I wouldn't pretend to tell you how to fight a fire. You wouldn't pretend to tell me how to practice law, and that's obvious. But because people want to save money, and I get it, because working with an attorney can be expensive. It's an investment, certainly. But I would say my experience has been time and again, people really do get what they pay for. And so if you try to do it on your own, if you've ever tried to fix your own sink or your own faucet by yourself, and I applaud you for doing it, okay? But I don't have that kind of experience, and I'm not the guy to do it. And if I did try to do it, after I make a mess of everything, I'm going to have to hire the plumber to come out and fix the mess I created before he or she can now fix what should have been fixed to begin with, if I'd have just hired that person straight out. So I just recommend try to avoid the internet-based plans, because I just don't think you're going to execute them with the right formalities. And if you do actually set it up the right way, are you transferring, especially if we're talking about a trust, are you putting the right assets into the trust so you're avoiding probate as to that asset? Maybe you are, maybe you're not. I don't know. Now, some people are really good at this, even though they're not attorneys. But those are few and far between. Most people really don't know what they don't know. And I just recommend, work with an attorney, work with a professional who knows how to do this and do it right the first time.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I've seen some of these guys try to change out faucets at the fire station too, right? They absolutely should not attempt to do that, or any estate planning on their own. They should certainly contact the experts. And actually, I had Lori Bolander on here. She was on episode 3, talking about the exact same thing. And it's not that you guys are looking for business. You guys have just been in the business for so long.
Yeah.
The disasters that this stuff can lead to. So please, guys, just consult with the experts. You mentioned something earlier I want to just circle back to. If I had a trustee in my trust, would they also have to be a beneficiary? We can assign beneficiaries from our pensions and things like that. Does that translate or no?
Ask your question again, because I think I misunderstood what you were saying.
Well, maybe that's because I don't fully understand it as clearly as I want. If does a trustee also have to be a beneficiary of that estate? And
no.
Then the kind of piggybacking on that, who would be a good, a lot of our folks that are thinking about getting an estate plan have young children. So who, and we don't want all, our assets to go to them and have them blow it. Frankly, if it went to my kids, they'd probably spend it all on, iPhone apps and Xbox games or something.
Of course, yeah.
Who would be a good option to sort of oversee that?
Yeah, excellent question. As the kids get older, if you have a responsible adult child, that would be a great idea. But then you might have, the other adult child who maybe is more the free spirit, artistic type, and that's fine, but may not be the best person to be a trustee or a successor trustee of the trust. If the kids are so young, I think a good answer is an adult relative, someone who knows the kids well. It could be a friend, family friend who knows the kids well. Sometimes sometimes people, because they're new to the area or they haven't been here for a while or whatever, they may not have that support network. So there are people that are called private professional fiduciaries. So these people can serve as the trustee. They can serve as the agent under the power of attorney. They can serve as the personal representative when it comes to the will, all these different functions. And they charge to do it, but it's probably money well spent if you don't have the other folks in your life who could serve in those capacities, and also to make sure the money is not doled out to the kids pell-mell, willy-nilly, just to protect that money. Because I know that the first responders, they work very hard for the money they make, and I understand the sacrifices they make to build the estates that they make. So it's always valuable to get a good plan in place, and then select the right people to be there to administer that plan if you can't be, for whatever reason.
Yeah, no, that's perfect. And can you just make it clear for folks, if you don't name anybody as a trustee of your estate, what would happen to the kids if there's nobody to sort of to take?
Well, I mean, yeah, if there is no trustee, I mean, sometimes mom and dad may not have, they appoint each other, so if something happens to me, dad, then I want, mom to take over.
Mhm.
But what happens if mom can't? Let's say, she either perished with you in the common disaster, or whatever took me out of the picture has left her severely disabled. Now she can't act for whatever reason. In that case, we would write the trust to say, you go to court and you would appoint somebody, and it can be some responsible adult, and it could be a family friend, it could be a business associate or colleague or whatever, to be appointed to be the trustee of the trust. So there's always contingency planning, but I think it makes a lot more sense to put it in black and white and just say, well, here's the order of succession. Successor trustee number 1, successor trustee number 2, etc. But failing that, you just go to court and have the court appoint somebody to take over.
Gosh, boy, another reason to get one of these plans in place. Is there anything in your mind, Rod, that would prevent somebody from getting a plan, to have a plan in place? Is there any downside to it?
There's no downside it's an important question. There is no downside to having a plan in place, but here's something I have to really be clear about. If the plan is old, I mean, I've worked with folks who did their plan over 20 years ago. And at that time, the kids were minors, and now they're grandchildren. I mean, probably not working so well for you. So all the more reason to, when you get a plan, first of all, keep it maintained and updated. And so for those folks who maybe would do better to have the personal protection plan, they don't own real property, and they may or may not have kids. At some point, they may own a home. They may own a home and some rental properties. Then they really should give consideration to having a living trust. Okay. And so as their circumstances change, and as the laws change, as their family changes, these are great times to revisit the planning they've got in place. But if somebody gets a living trust, okay, and they don't put any assets into it, well, that's a challenge, because now you've guaranteed probate, because there's nothing that's going to avoid probate, because the trust doesn't own anything. So that can be a real shock. And sometimes you'll see this with people who got the internet plan, and they may have done a good job drafting it and execute it with all the formalities, but they missed the important step, which was to transfer the home into the living trust, or any other assets like a bank account or a brokerage account or what have you. So it's great to get the plan in place, but make sure it owns the right assets, and keep it updated and maintained. When I work with clients and we do, say, a trust-based plan because they have real property, I make sure that we are talking about every 3 years, because I give my clients a membership in a company where that maintains a copy of their healthcare directive and their HIPAA authorization, and they get a card that I ask that they keep in their wallet next to their health insurance card and driver's license. So if they have to go to the hospital and they can't speak for themselves, there's a toll-free number that the first responder or the nurse at the hospital can call, toll-free, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, and a copy of the healthcare directive and the HIPAA authorization will be faxed over to the hospital. And that can make it really, because I mean, in the event of an emergency, people, it's not unusual. People aren't thinking clearly. They just know, I got to get to the hospital. And they don't know, well, where do we put the paperwork? Or where's Rod's healthcare directive or HIPAA? I don't know. I just know I got to get to the hospital. Mm-hmm. And so when you get there, here's the card we've already called, and here's a copy of the healthcare directive and the HIPAA. What would you like us to do for Rod's welfare?
Oh, that's brilliant. And that's going to hit directly home with all of our folks, because every single day we're dealing with people that are they're scrambling. It's a loved one scrambling to get all the documents in order so we can rush them off to the hospital, and they're hoping that squared away. But it sounds like this is a much more efficient way of doing things. What you're saying about updating the trust, it rings true to me. It's similar to like rebalancing a portfolio. You have to just go back in there and just check up on it. Just, wipe the dust off and make sure that everything in there is up to date, the way that you intend it to
Sure.
be for your beneficiary.
Yeah.
It's less often than you would rebalance a portfolio, maybe every 3 years. Like
Of course.
it's the same concept that our people need to wrap their heads around.
Yeah. And because the plan, I have a challenge with clients. They just think, well, I sign it one time, that takes care of everything for all time. And say, no, it doesn't work that way. Your life will change, the laws will change, your assets will change, all that stuff. I mean, if you'd have told me a year ago that we would have been in a pandemic, I would have just said, are you crazy? But, things happen. So you have to just, be prepared. And so when life changes, and it can change overnight, you're prepared to meet it head on. So I think a minimum of every 3 years, and in the membership that I get my clients in this company that provides that toll-free access to their healthcare directive and HIPAA 24/7, 365, it's good for 3 years, and for a reason. I want to see them coming back in about every 3 years when that's about to expire. And let's take a look. Does the plan that we drafted for you, does it still work for you? Do the assets, are they still titled in the name of the trust? Have the laws changed, or maybe we ought to update your plan to take advantage of the laws the way they are? So, it's valuable. Otherwise, you're taking a real chance that something you signed years ago is still going to work years later. Multiple years later, like 10, 20 years later.
Right. No, yeah, that makes perfect sense. Before we wrap up your first loan, do you think part of that, are people worried that, if they have to come back and see you, they're going to have to shell out a bunch of different.
No, if we've had a relationship, and if they know, like, and trust me, and they invested with me to get the plan done, I try to charge a fee that I think is fair and reflective. They're not going to have to make the initial investment all over again. But I say, look, to update your plan, I figure it's probably however many hours worth of work, and this is my hourly rate times that amount of time. I think this is probably a reasonable fee, and if you agree, then let's go forward, and then we'll update the plan. And I know some colleagues of mine offer kind of a maintenance program, but I offer what's called a free service package. We'll review everything every 3 years. The review is free, and if we identify opportunities where we can improve the plan, then I'll quote a fee that I think is fair and reflective of my time and talent. And if they want to hire me to do it, then great. They don't have to come back. I hope that they will, though. And if they want to update their plan, they don't have to update it with me necessarily. But here's the big insight. If somebody comes to me and they had a plan done by somebody else, I cannot and I will not put an amendment on that plan, because that inserts me into the liability chain. Because if the original attorney made a mistake, if you ever played the game hot potato, the last person that holds it gets burned. I'm not doing that. But I'll explain to them how we need to update their plan if it was done by somebody else. And if it was a plan I did, then I'll say, well, these are the changes that I would recommend you consider making. And here's what I think is a fair fee. If it's a trusted relationship, if you'd like to move forward, then tell me and we'll do that.
Yeah, no, that sounds more than fair. Just wrapping things up here, what piece of advice, and you've given us so much great information already, but what piece of advice would you give somebody that's just starting out on their journey towards financial independence or financial literacy as it relates to planning?
I would say get a plan in place, and here's why. The financial planning, and I know that you've interviewed lots of really talented people who can provide great value to the clients. But, I've actually had financial advisors tell their clients, if you don't get an estate plan in place, none of the financial planning that we're going to do together really makes any difference, because it's all going to be wiped out. Probate is time consuming, it's expensive, and it's a matter of public record. So get that plan in place, and it really needs to be a marriage of the financial and the estate planning together. And if you get that done, then you are just increasing your chances of success, whatever that means to you. So anytime you can stay out of probate court, that's a good day in my book. Having spent 7 years in probate court myself, I can tell you that it's not a pleasant experience. It's there, and certainly it's the default rule, the default plan. Whether you have a a will or don't have a will, I mean, that's, you got to go through probate. If you have a trust and it owns your assets, no probate. Much better answer, I think.
Yeah.
Makes sense?
Yeah, absolutely. That makes just perfect sense. What a disaster that would be for us to work as hard as we do
Oh,
to,
sure.
have something to pass on to our heirs,
Yep.
whatever it is, to just the nightmare of having to, go through probate and the hassle that is for people that are maybe still grieving is just a nightmare. And I think with that, Rod, that's just a perfect way
Of
to.
course.
So if
Yeah.
People are looking to learn more about you, Rod, where could they find you?
Yeah. My website is Hatley, Hatley, lawgroup.com, HatleyLawGroup.com. And I do have a firm Facebook page, Hatley Law Group, APC, that's on Facebook. You can also find me on LinkedIn, Hatley Law Group, or Rodney J. Hatley. And I go by Rod, but I answer to Rodney because that's my given name. And I have information about my background, and also I think what I hope are interesting articles, blog articles that we've done about estate planning, different estate planning topics that I think viewers or listeners to the podcast would find enjoyable, and perhaps it would motivate them to take action. The biggest challenge is people get all this great information, but if they don't do anything with it, it's really not helping them very much. So my goal is to always encourage people, look, listen to the podcast, check out my blog, go to my website. I have various videos. I've had a chance to be on the radio, be on the television. And I just encourage people, get smart about what your options are, but then please take action, because all the knowledge in the world doesn't do you much good if you don't do anything with it.
Yeah, I think Derek Sivers is the one that said, if more information was all that was needed, everybody would be millionaires with six-pack abs.
Of course.
You have to go out there and do something about it. And I just love that. So with that, Rod, I just want to thank you for everything that you've given us today, your service to our country, and your time today.
It's been an honor to be with you. Thank you for having me.
All right. Hey, thanks again to Rod for meeting me here in the bullpen. His message about getting that personal protective plan in place is just perfect. It's a great way to kickstart your estate planning process. It gets you a will, a power of attorney, healthcare directive, and also that HIPAA authorization form. If then you have more assets that you'd like to put in there, then maybe a living trust is the next step. But for starters, that personal protective plan is key. If you'd like to learn more about Rod, you can find him on his website at HatleyLawGroup.com. That's HATLEY lawgroup.com. If you'd like to learn more about us, we're on Facebook at The FIREhouse. That's f.i.r.e-house. On Instagram, the _fire_house. On LinkedIn, the FIREhouse Investors, or any place you listen to podcasts. If you learned something today, guys, will you do me a favor and give this podcast a review? It helps me know exactly what you guys want to hear more about, and it gives me ways to improve. But no matter what you do, take this information, go out there and get some. Stay F.